analyzing the graphs that you created in your author attribution software needs to be analyzed. And the overriding rule for this process is that you must do multiple tests with different packages of authors in order to come to a conclusion. 1, 2, 3, even a half a dozen tests is usually not enough to be conclusive. It give you a strong indication, but you need to follow through on as many tests as you can. Also, there are 3 criteria that we use to make a decision on a document using this software, and only one of the 3 involves the calculation that the computer does in your author attribution software. We also need to take into consideration content and context. By content, I mean, is the philosophical approach, is the political line of the document that you're reading, or if it's fiction, is it the subject matter, and again, the approach that the author takes fit in with the other writings. That's content. Context is more like if we know where this document was produced, especially for historical documents, we know the location usually, we know the exact date, and if the author is not nearby, or if it's not possible for him to have communicated within a month or so for transport across the Atlantic, for example, if that wasn't possible, then it's not possible for this author to have written a particular one, even though the calculation might indicate it could be that person. So with that in mind, we're going to look at a classic era in historical work, and that's African slavery in America. If you go online and type that in, you'll see 1,000 references to Thomas Paine being the author. And that was started by a man named Moncure Conway, who did the first up-to-date, relatively up-to-date collected works of Thomas Paine back in the 1890s. And he put this piece in. And it's solely based on a letter that Benjamin Rush wrote regarding Paine, who attributed it to Paine on something that he heard. In other words, it's third-hand information that Conway was using. Somebody said something, Rush heard it, then he said something, and then that person, Conway found the letter and put it in his collection. So, the note came to the Pennsylvania Journal. It's a magazine that Paine did not write for. He had just started his own magazine, Pennsylvania Magazine, but this was in a different journal, which would make that suspicious that he was the author. And I'll give you more context and content later. But it came with a note signed AB. In content terms, this probably is not Paine, and many scholars of Paine have come to that conclusion decades ago, because it comes from a Christian perspective, and Paine was not Christian. He uses Christian references throughout, not general attributing things to God in the abstract, but particular Christian references, and Paine never did that. The AB signature, Paine never used that as a pseudonym or initials when he was doing work. There are 2 people in Philadelphia where this was printed who did use AB. One was Hopkinson, which we'll test, and he used that abbreviation. And also it's the initials of Anthony Benezet, the most famous abolitionist writer in America at the time. So with that in mind, let's start some testing. When I first started this, I took a random collection of people with Paine to see if Paine could be the author. In the first test, he scored 20%, which is not sufficient. And someone named Cassandra, that was his pseudonym, was James Cannon, comes up strong here, pretty strong, over 40%. You have to be considered as a candidate. Then I tested it with other people. I included Cassandra, because he won the first one, and you can see that John Adams, at almost 70%, looks like the author, which is strange. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But Cassandra is dwarfed. It depends on the combination of authors to make a determination who an author is. A single test, 2 tests, even 10 tests sometimes is not enough. Then I tried it a third time, and we got a third candidate, over 60% for Franklin, very strong. Problem is, Franklin's in Europe at this time, so context is a problem here, but he dwarfs Cassandra again, and again, pain is negligible. On all these tests so far, pain is negligible. This software is stronger about eliminating possible authors than it is on finding an author, because you have to make sure you have all possibilities, which is a little open-ended. This, to me, already, I'm convinced that Payne's not the author, including this next one. I took Adams and Franklin and Cassandra and compared them with a few other random people, including Hopkinson, who used the AB signature. But it's definitely not Hopkinson in this case. Adams and Franklin still come up strong, but not 40% on either of them. So we're looking at the possibility of collaboration, this is an indication of collaboration. But again, context eliminates that, and so does content, because Adams and Franklin never wrote in a Christian perspective. And this essay is written from a Christian perspective clearly, with Christian references, and the argument itself is based on Christianity. Again, Cassandra is pretty much eliminated by now, but we have to solve this problem. Why are these people coming up? At this point, when I was analyzing this, I keep thinking that we do not have the right author. This is one indication that you don't have the right author. You get multiple people coming up strong on different combinations. So I decided to put everybody like a big test. I took 16 people and put it in, and we got another candidate, Hopkins. Now this is a strong candidate because next to Anthony Benezet, over here, Samuel Hopkins from Rhode Island was the next prolific abolitionist writer of the period. And he knew Benezet, and they communicated with each other constantly. If Hopkins is in Rhode Island and he wants to get an article published in Philadelphia, which is sort of the main city in the colonies at the time, he would have sent it to Benezet and asked him to find a newspaper to publish this. So when Benezet took that article from Hopkins and brought it to the Pennsylvania Journal with that note, he would have signed it AB because that's who was delivering it, but the author was really Hopkins. This is what it's indicating to me at this time. Notice that Payne at this point is totally eliminated as the author of African Slavery. So what we need to do is test Hopkins against every possible author that we can think of, including some from England who might have sent it to Benezet. So first, we took Hopkins against the leading candidates so far in other tests, and Benezet. Adams, negligible. Cassandra, non-existent. Franklin, negligible. Payne, as usual, is negligible. It's pretty strong for Hopkins, over 70% against the previous winners. Let's do it again for this combination. Again, Hopkins. Another combination, Hopkins. This is an indication at this point that I'm pretty confident that Hopkins, by the calculation part, is the choice of the computer. Let's do it again for another combination. And let's go head-to-head with somebody named Granville Sharp, who was the leading abolitionist writer in England at the time. And he could have sent this over to Benezet to be published, but you can see 90% for Hopkins against Sharp. We can conclude at this point that this is Hopkins. One more test on various people. I didn't get into the other tests to make sure. People like Woolman, Catherine Macaulay, Sackville in England, Grenville in England. And it's very conclusive that the computer loves Hopkins for this. Now, if it's still not Hopkins, and the computer's making a huge mistake, you would not get, I've never seen results in the some 10,000 tests I've done on different authors, on different essays, in different periods. I've never seen someone be so dominant across so many authors. Usually, if it's not really the author, that other people will start pulling away style features and giving it to another random other people, like they did in the beginning here. This is typical of getting different people coming up all the time. But as soon as you get the right author in the mix, It's consistently every time for that author. That's what you're looking for. So going back to content and context for this piece, if you read other essays that Hopkins wrote on the question of slavery in America in this time period, you will see the same logic and the same approach to the question based on the Christian gospel. The doctrine of Christianity is used to make the argument against slavery. The context is, like I said, he was far away from Philadelphia to get this printed, but he was close friends with Anthony Benezet. They shared the same mission, and having him send this article to Benezet to get published in the paper is very logical. So nothing contradicts the calculation. The content and context are not prohibitive. So I would make a judgment on this point of Samuel Hopkins.